Today, we're diving into an absolutely incredible story of leadership and survival from World War II. It's all about one sergeant, a handful of rookies, and 4 insane days on a forgotten hilltop that would go down in history.
All right, I want you to just picture this. You're on day 4 of a non-stop battle. You're basically out of ammo, you're completely exhausted, and now 2 German tanks are literally grinding their way right up to your position. Suddenly, the hatch on the lead tank pops open, and the commander makes you an offer. An offer that says, hey, you get to live.
In his response, he refused. Just flat out refused. No hesitation. So you gotta ask, right? Who was this guy? And how in the world did he end up in a spot where he could stare down a tank commander and just say no? To get that, well, we have to go back to the beginning of the story.
Okay, so our story really kicks off on this cold, rainy morning deep in the forests of France. This is where we're going to meet our main character and see the absolutely impossible situation he was about to get thrown into. This right here is Technical Sergeant Charles Coolidge. And look, don't let his age fool you. He was only 23 years old, but he was already a hardened veteran. I mean, he'd been through the absolute meat grinder of the Italian campaign, surviving some of the war's worst fighting at Salerno, Anzio, and Monte Cassino. But all that experience, it was about to be tested like it never had been before.
And the situation he was in, it was completely lopsided. Coolidge had just 12 guys with him, and most of them were brand new replacements who'd never even seen combat. They were up against an entire German company. We're talking about 150 veteran soldiers already dug into fortified positions. And to top it all off, there were no commissioned officers around. The highest-ranking man was Sergeant Coolidge. It was all on him.
So Coolidge is scouting ahead, right? He's just trying to find some good spots for his machine guns. He and another sergeant are moving through this thick fog, and they literally just stumble right into the entire German company, face to face. They're spotted instantly. He had, maybe 2 seconds to figure out what to do next.
So what does he do? He doesn't run. He doesn't surrender. Nope. He does something you will never, ever find in an Army field manual. He stands up, with just his carbine, mind you, and demands that all 150 Germans surrender to him. Their answer? A complete tidal wave of gunfire. And just like that, the 4 longest days of his life had officially begun. So Coolidge and his guys scramble back to their lines, with the Germans right on their heels. And this is where we see his calm leadership really shine. It's where he turns a group of absolutely terrified rookies into a real, determined fighting force.
Okay, so the battle itself unfolded over 4 really brutal days. On day 1, Coolidge is just calmly directing his machine guns, and they managed to beat back 4 separate infantry assaults. Then on day 2, the Germans attack through this dense fog, and the fighting becomes basically hand-to-hand. Coolidge himself has to run over and plug a gap in their line. Day 3 kicks off with a massive mortar barrage, and by this point, their ammo is running dangerously low. And that brings us to day 4, when the Germans finally decided to bring in the heavy armor.
So after 3 straight days of failed infantry attacks, the Germans were clearly fed up. They decided it was time to end this once and for all. What happened next was, honestly, one of the most remarkable small unit actions of the entire war.
Think about it. Their heavy machine guns, the very weapons that had held the line for 3 days, were now totally useless against all that steel plate. Their only hope? A single M1 bazooka, a weapon that was, kind of famous for being unreliable. And to even have a prayer of it working, Coolidge would have to get within 25 yards of a tank that was actively, right at that moment, trying to kill him.
So what does he do? He grabs the bazooka, and he just starts walking, not running, walking, calmly, right toward the advancing tanks, while machine gun fire is just tearing up the ground all around him. He gets to 25 yards, drops to one knee, aims, and pulls the trigger. And all he hears is a hollow click. The weapon was a dud. It was dead.
I mean, just pause and think about that for a second. You're kneeling in the open, 25 yards away from a German tank, holding a completely useless weapon, and Coolidge didn't run. He didn't retreat. He didn't even flinch.
Instead of panicking, he showed this incredible tactical genius right there under fire. He tosses the useless bazooka aside, grabs every single hand grenade he can find, and starts crawling forward. He knew, hey, I can't stop the tanks, so he went after the infantry that were advancing right behind them. The explosions just ripped through their formation, shattered the whole coordinated assault, and caused complete chaos.
So Coolidge's insane one-man assault completely broke the German charge, but his men were out of ammo. They had nothing left. So he gives the order for an organized withdrawal, and he stays at the very back to cover them as they pull out. When they finally made it back to headquarters, people looked at the numbers and, well, they just didn't add up. Something seemed impossible.
And this is probably the single most astounding fact of the entire battle. After 4 days, 96 hours of nonstop combat against a totally overwhelming force, not a single one of Coolidge's men had been killed. 0.
I mean, the final tally was just staggering. For 96 hours, his tiny section had repelled more than a dozen different attacks. They'd inflicted something like 50 to 60 casualties on the enemy, and on their side, only 4 wounded, and every single one of them survived. The battalion command, who had pretty much written them off as lost, was just stunned. It was totally unprecedented.
But you know, the story doesn't just end on that battlefield. The man who came down from that hill, he would go on to live a long and truly remarkable life, even though he never ever saw himself as the hero that everyone else knew he was.
For his incredible leadership and just unbelievable bravery, Sergeant Coolidge was awarded the Medal of Honor. And that recommendation was put in almost immediately by officers who knew they had just witnessed something truly extraordinary. But Coolidge himself, he just never saw it that way. In his mind, he wasn't some kind of hero. He was just a sergeant doing his job. His men were in trouble, and he did what he had to do to keep them alive. For him, it was always about his men, never about him.
So after the war, he went home to Tennessee and went right back to work in his family's printing business. He lived a very quiet life, and he rarely ever spoke about the war. When he passed away in 2021, at the incredible age of 99, he was one of the very last living links we had to that incredible generation of heroes.
So in the end, the story of Charles Coolidge really leaves us with this big, profound question, one that historians still debate. In a moment of absolute pure terror, what separates the people who run from the people who stay? What makes someone like Sergeant Coolidge walk calmly toward the danger? You know, he never claimed to have the answer. He just knew what he had to do when that moment came.